So we've got our finger joint and it doesn't fit into our slot. What we want to do is just make sure the slot is nice and accurate, so just make sure that we're pretty close to the line there, very close to the line, using a tenon saw to be down and a coping saw to come across, and we find that it doesn't fit. Everything else we're going to do on the finger itself. So we're going to take our finger piece and we're going to put it into the vise, nice and low, and we're going to take a chisel from our block. Just make sure before we start that the chisel is nice and sharp. Don't push your finger into it, obviously, but you can have a look and just check there's no dinks in it. When people use this on metal, it hits a nail, it can get dense. We want it to be nice and sharp. Okay, once you've got your chisel, we're going to have a look with our slot piece over our finger, and we're going to see where we think it needs to have some material removed. I think that's going to be on this side here particularly, so we must be safe. These are very sharp, they can draw blood. We're going to make sure we put our fingers on top of the chisel, and we're going to work away from our body at all times. With this, we're going to go really, really finely. Never try and take too much off the chisel. We're just going to, again, the tool to the work, we're going to take off small amounts of material, like so. We're going to also come downwards and take off little slivers of wood, down like so. To remove these, put the edge of the chisel into the edge there, and we can just drag it away, or we can come in this way, and that's made it a little bit thinner. So at this stage, we're going to try it again, and we want to find it's nice and tight. We repeat that until it gets to this kind of stage where it's tight, but we feel that it could actually slot on with a bit of pushing. And we evaluate, and we just see there that there's no gaps. If you have got gaps, I can show you how to fill some of those, but hopefully you've got a stage where even without glue, it's got a nice tight joint. Okay, so we've cut our pieces now. We've got two fingers, we've got two slots, and what we do is what's called a dry run. That's where the phrase dry run comes from. We see if it fits in when it's dry, i.e. without glue. If it's very tight, like this one's quite tight, what you could do is ask it nicely with a mallet. You can just tap it into place. If you feel it's going to go without splitting, that will ensure you've got a strong joint and you've got a nice tight gap there. But you may want to take a bit more off, don't force it. Let's go through it again. On the hands. Okay. Closing it up now. Don't hit too hard, you'll damage your wood. Okay, and we have a box. You can always check that straight using our tri-square. Now you may find that you've got some little gaps here. In this instance, there's a big gap here and not a gap here, and that's because we cut a bit below the line. So what we could do is we could remove a tiny sliver here, safely in the vise with a chisel, or we can fill that gap. That's not a very big gap. If you have a big gap, the way we fill them is we can take a bit of this glue, PVA, a little bit should be in a pot, and we can fill these gaps. Now, if you want these to be permanently stuck together, then take a small bit of PVA and just wipe a bit on the fingers. And then when we slot them back together again, in 24 hours, that's going to be a full strength joint. Got some excess glue there, we're going to remove the excess glue. Now, if we've got any gaps we want to fill, what we can do is put a bit of that PVA. Take this as an example, there's a big gap there. We can put a bit of the PVA into that gap. Now, splat it on But then we're going to use our fingers and we're going to push it into that gap. We're going to remove all the PVA, so all you're left with is a little white streak in that gap. What we then do is take some sandpaper and we can sand, as we would do anyway. So we want to remove those pencil marks now. And as we remove those pencil marks, it's creating sawdust, and that sawdust we put into that gap. And when you spend longer than I have, it should cover that gap up quite nicely. One thing I forgot to mention is before we do that, make sure that it's all together. Because we cut a bit deeper than we need to, what you'll see is there's a bit of the finger is pointing up about 1 millimetre, and these two fingers are pointing up a bit too far as well. We'd remove that on the belt sander. We'd keep it flat on the base and we'd just show it the belt sander until it's nice and flush on the surface, and then we'd fill the gaps.